This is a Beyond Barriers Unscripted podcast.
Teaching is a means of content creation.
Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Randy Owen. Today's guest is Dr. Daniel Sanculi. Danny is a college professor, freelance photographer, and digital artist. During our conversation, Danny shares about his love for photography and digital art. He also talks about early influences on his life and how that helped him become successful. Before we get started, I'd like to ask that if you enjoy the show, please share with a friend and hit that subscribe button. Also, if you have any questions or comments or have ideas for possible guests in upcoming episodes, please feel free to shoot me an email at bb.unscripted@gmail.com. And now my conversation with Danny. Can we go back a little bit and talk about, childhood, where you're from, and do you have any kind of memories or anything that happened or anybody, maybe a mentor or something that has helped keep you going? Because to have a PhD, man, that just takes a huge level of commitment.
One of the most significant memories is when I was really young, my mom and dad used to tell me that if you found a job you like or love, you'll never work a day in your life. And so I used to, at a really young age, I used to be very introspective and started to ask myself, well, what is it that I love to do? Um, and when I was a freshman in high school, I met my best friend. His name is Zach. And at the time, he was a junior in high school. And so, in high school, that's a pretty big age difference. And what ended up happening is over my first year of high school, we just became really close friends. And, I didn't know at the time, but he kind of took me under his wings, and that was probably the biggest influence, was meeting him. And so those first 2 years of high school, I went to parties and stuff with like the junior and seniors of high school. And so how I look at it now is those first 2 years, my freshman and sophomore year of high school, I kind of did what most high school students do in their junior and senior year, go to parties and stuff. And so I'll never forget this experience. I went to my friend Zach's graduation. So he was graduating high school, and so I was just finishing my sophomore year. And I was in the audience watching, all these high school students graduate and thinking to myself, like, what are all these students thinking? They're probably thinking, okay, well, what am I going to do with my life now? And just the realization dawned on me that I didn't necessarily have to wait, 2 more years to graduate to start thinking about that question. What am I going to do with my life? And, I just, maybe it was a subconscious decision, but I was like, wow, it was like a freeing experience. It was like, I have 2 more years to ponder this question. And so for the next 2 years, that's really what I did is I didn't do as much partying, and I was very much into spirituality, and really my goal was to figure out what my passion was in life. And towards the end of my high school education, I found my passion was it was in um, really it was in philosophy, just trying to understand and think about the ideas of consciousness and the mind. And so, and that gets a little more, complex, but basically I was just so fascinated with the human mind and consciousness. And, I was just like, I want to know as much as I can about this. And that was when I decided to pursue, you know, kind of at that time, I knew I wanted to get a PhD, but I didn't really know exactly what that meant. And so I think that's where my drive comes from is, this experience in high school where I was able to spend a lot of time just thinking about what I wanted to do with my life.
So you go through high school, you go into college. Why neuroscience? Is neuroscience just that wondering of what makes us tick? And you mentioned philosophy earlier.
Yeah, so even though I have a PhD in neuroscience, I consider myself much more of a philosopher than a scientist. And for me personally, I just distinguish that as, for me, I'm more interested in questions that science really can't address right now. And so, I mean, there's just so many things I could talk about, but um, so what happened was when I was a senior in high school, I was taking a psychology course, and I had this amazing psychology professor. I wish I could remember her name right now. And in that class, that was when I was taking psychology, and all of these things I was learning about psychology were amazing because it would fit with my behavior and my experience in life, right? We learned about these, we have these conditioned responses and stuff. And then I would want to know what was really going on in the brain. And so I would ask her, and she's like, you should look into cognitive neuroscience. So that was my first kind of spark, was like, okay, well, how can I study cognitive neuroscience? So I was like, well, let's go get a degree in cognitive neuroscience. And so I was living in Westminster, Colorado, and what I realized is for undergraduate degrees, it's hard to specialize in neuroscience, at least at the time. This was back in 2003. Now there's a lot of undergraduate neuroscience programs. But so I realized it was going to take, graduate school, you know, levels to get to the point where I could really understand what we know in terms of science about the mind and consciousness. And so, yeah, it was like, okay, I knew I wanted to understand the mind, and I knew we didn't, like, as humans, we don't even understand what that is. But if you want to understand it, you should first try to understand everything about the organ that is the mind, right? And that's the brain. So that's what led me to neuroscience.
As you were talking, this question pops up in my head. What are your thoughts on artificial intelligence? And is it truly possible? Can intelligence only be supported by living organisms, or do you think we can replicate it?
Yeah, I definitely am not an expert on this at all. Um, but it's a thought that I was actually thinking about recently. And I think, yeah, artificial intelligence started when we first started using computers. And you know, I for me, I'm not the type that, like, gets worried about robots taking over, or artificial intelligence becoming more advanced than humans, is just because the smartest people in the world working on understanding the brain and consciousness have no idea what it is, have no idea what's really going on with the mind and consciousness. And so everything that's, programs and computers and AI is, programmed by us. And
Right, and that's why I raised the question.
yeah, I mean, I don't, I think, it's essential that we continue to use technology to expand our own nervous systems, in a sense. That's how I see AI, as kind of an extension of our own nervous systems.
But do you see us actually implementing and people having devices or technologies implanted in the future, and that becoming the norm?
Oh man, I've never thought about that. I don't really think so, because I think everything right now is going wireless and Bluetooth, that I think the point that we would even be implanting stuff, we would probably test that with, other model systems, and by that time, who knows, maybe we wouldn't need implants. But yeah, I think eventually, we could. I personally think technology, they're going to find out first how to just create new eyes in the lab or regenerate new neurons before they're going to figure out how to create an artificial eye implant. I mean, I think they could, I mean, they certainly are doing it with vision and hearing, but to actually like get to the point of the resolution of the human eye, I think we'll be able to just grow a new human eye in the lab and regenerate neurons in the brain before we're going to create technology that's as advanced as the human eye.
Okay. So can you talk about becoming, so are you do you go by professor, instructor? What's your title?
Well, I mean, my title is I'm a full-time faculty. Um, and I'm a doctor, but I'm an instructor, professor, and for me, it's not really important what people call me. I'd rather them call me what they're comfortable with. I'd rather be approachable, and I've always been comfortable with Danny. That's just my real name is Daniel, but I've been called Danny my whole life. That it just never felt right to switch to Daniel, and so that's kind of why if people ask me, what should I call you? I say Danny. But I think, as a student too, you're oftentimes, just feel like you should refer to your teacher as professor or
You
instructor.
almost said it, though. You almost said it, your professor.
Yeah.
How does it feel being on the other side of that when a student calls you professor?
Well, so this is actually my first teaching job. I did a lot of teaching as a grad student, but I was a teaching assistant. And many of the courses I was a teaching assistant for, I practically was the lead instructor. But, so this was my first experience. And I remember just, a few weeks ago, the first email I got, and it was like addressed to like Professor Sanculi. And yeah, it's a really weird thing. It's, to me, it wasn't them using the term Professor Sanculi. It was more just how happy I was to have my own students, my own class, so that was just a really cool experience.
Do you find yourself doing a lot of after hours work, being, I'm going to call you a professor, but
That's
being in
fine.
that position, it's not a 9 to 5 job.
Yeah, so there's a couple things about that. Is one, as a college instructor, um, one of the reasons why I really was drawn to the community college environment is I wanted my sole focus to be on teaching. And so if you want to work at a university, even a state university, you're most likely going to be required to have a lot of research responsibilities. And so that was one of the things that I really liked about the community college system. And then the other aspect about community colleges that really drew me were, you know, there's there's a responsibility I think all teachers have, and and this isn't just community colleges, is this idea of equity and inclusion. And so this is something that is really important to me. And so these various characteristics of the community college, whoops, Siri picked me up, just really drew me to the community college. And yeah, I don't know if that was your original question, but
No, no, no. It just leads to the question, the passion. What is it about teaching that you receive? And one of the questions that I did have in mind that I wanted to ask you was, so far, any inspirational stories from any of your students? Just kind of
yeah, now I actually kind of remember what your other question was about. But it's very inspirational. So I teach anatomy and physiology, and the a lot of the students are going into the healthcare professions. A lot of students wanting to go to nursing school and stuff like that. And so because of this, the students that I'm teaching really have a passion to be there. They're really serious about it. And to me, that's just so inspiring. And working at a community college, a lot of the students are working full-time jobs, have families. So one of the courses I teach is from 7 to 10 p.m. It's an anatomy class. And just I love teaching, and so I'm preparing all day, and I get there at night, and then I see these students, who oftentimes a lot of them just got done working a full day and cooking dinner. And to me, that's just so inspiring to see them there, trying to better their lives, pursuing a passion, and kind of going back to, that was me, in high
Yeah.
school and college. So just, yeah, so far, it's hard to describe how much I just love this job, and how much, how reaffirming it is that, I knew this was my passion like 5 or 6 years ago, but you never totally know because I didn't do it. And now I'm doing it. And it's like, wow.
There's something special when your students succeed.
Yeah,
There really
for
is.
sure. Okay, so I remembered your other question, and I want to finish that. So you were asking about like the 9 to 5 job. And that is something I've thought about. And so, as a community college instructor, what I was saying is, especially for me, this first semester is going to be a lot more time because, preparing for these new courses. But what's awesome is, the next couple semesters, I'll have I'll have my foundation. And what's amazing about teaching is you get a new set of students each semester, and you never graduate as a teacher. You can always
You learn
improve.
something new.
Exactly. You can always improve. We're always learning more about effective ways of teaching. And so that's what I'm most excited for, is once I really get my bearings, then I can really start exploring some, novel ways of teaching. But yeah, it's not a 9 to 5 job. But well, the cool thing is because I'm so passionate about it, I'm happy to, put in a lot more time than, 40 hours a week.
Would you agree with the statement, the best way to learn is to teach?
Um, yeah, yeah, I would say that that's pretty accurate. I think how I would look at that is, in order to teach well, you have to know something pretty well. So, because you can, go on Facebook and people are going to try to teach you a lot of things, but that doesn't mean what they're teaching is necessarily true. So, but I think, like, especially if you're just talking about education, like college and stuff, or even material or learning material, yeah, learning, and this is something we could talk about, but learning is a process of forming new connections in your brain. And so, in order to teach something, right, you should probably have those connections formed. And so, but yeah, in the process of teaching and getting prepared for teaching, you're going to learn more and solidify those networks. So I totally agree with that statement.
Are you teaching remotely, or are you actually in the classroom, or are you doing a hybrid thing?
No, so we're all remote still. So that was one of the nice things when I took this position, is I was going to be able to stay in Davis this semester.
Are you working on an asynchronous schedule, or you actually have live lectures?
Yeah, so all my courses are synchronous. So I have lectures, and I'm actually teaching labs as well, but it's, online.
Okay. As a person with low vision, what challenges are you facing doing this, and what workarounds are you using?
There's a couple of things, so one of the things that I think, um, the main challenge I've had so far is, when we first started working together, I was deciding between Mac or PC, because I had my own PC and I had a Mac, and I was familiar with both, and I decided to go with my PC, which I'm so happy. And but my setup at home, which is completely custom for my, uh my low vision. Well, anyways, what happened last week, or so it was my first week teaching, it was Wednesday. Um I woke up at 5 in the morning and my power was out in Davis.
Oh, yeah, I
And
remember that day.
so I was, had a lot of things to do before lecture. And so anyways, I realized my power wasn't going to come on. And so I just had my little 13-inch MacBook, which I had forgotten most of the assistive technology stuff. All I could do was zoom in and out. And I rode my bike to an office in downtown Davis, and I did my 2 classes on my laptop. And that was a huge challenge, but and so what happened was, I was just honest with my class, and they were all patient and understanding. But the next day when I came back to my apartment with my assistive technology, it just made me so grateful for what I have. And so I think, that's the major thing is, I've had to kind of I'm grateful that I've been able to invest a lot of money into this setup. But really simply put is I would say you just have to do everything you can to obtain the technology, because really, in my opinion, if you want a comparable setup as a visually impaired person to do things, and this is for people with partial vision, because if you're just using JAWS, then you can just use a laptop. Or I'm sorry, I don't mean to say that, but like for me, since I am using my vision, I have to have two monitors. One of them is a 27-inch monitor that's normal magnification, and then the one on the right is a whole magnification window. So basically, and then there's a lot of other things for my teaching that I have that helps for my vision. So I have like things that I can just press buttons to start and stop, my Zoom things, um, so yeah, it's basically I just have a really, special custom office, I call it now, set up to do this.
So are you using magnification and some screen reader? Are you just solely doing this visual? Because you said earlier when you were on a 13-inch MacBook, you said you could zoom, but you didn't have all your accessibility features.
Yeah, so basically how whenever I'm using the computer now, I'm only using screen reading softwares if I'm reading things
Mm-hmm.
longer than a few sentences.
Gotcha.
So, if I'm not, and rarely when I'm typing. So if I'm typing emails, I rarely use it. Um, what I do use it for is whenever I'm reading like the textbook. So,
Okay.
I'm making sure I read all the material my students read, and so when I do that, I'm always using screen readers.
Gotcha. So this is just a question, and it kind of follows up on, it makes me think of what you were just talking about. Do you enjoy grading assignments?
No, I would say grading assignments is my least favorite, but not necessarily because of the work, but this was my experience as a TA is, so when I was a TA at UC Davis, UC Davis, like a lot of schools in California, the so students who are coming to UC schools from high school, the average incoming GPA is like a 4.5 or a 4.6. But to put that in perspective, when I was going to high school, the maximum you could get was a 4.0. We didn't even have the ability to get above. But the fact that the average student coming to UC Davis is above a 4.0, and then you have a class of 100 of them, and some of them fail. That was the hardest part about grading, is to fail a student, because you have to grade objectively, you have to grade fair. And the reality is, and sometimes students don't put forth the effort. And that's what's hard about grading is, you want everyone to do well and you want them to learn the material. But at the same time, you can't force someone to put in the effort. And oftentimes they have challenges in life that prevent that. And so you have to be, sensitive, but at the same time, grade objectively.
Eventually, we're going to end up back in the classroom, hopefully. What is your vision of that? What do you think that's going to be like? What do you hope that's going to be like?
Well, I think what I'll say about that is, whatever's going to happen is going to happen, because a lot of times it's out of our control. It's based on what policies are made, But what I think is really amazing and very interesting is I think there's been a huge thing that has happened over the past year with this whole situation. And it's the realization of how important the digital world is. And I can give you a simple example of this to illustrate it. When COVID first happened, if you were to watch the news, and I'm talking major news outlets, and you would look at their anchors trying to go into their houses and do this, they were using their laptops. And so the quality of video was horrible. It was just
Right.
these really poor webcams. Very quickly, they realized something, that there's a community who's already mastered this, and it's the streaming and content creator community. And they went over to them and they're like, wow, what you need to create profession, and I'm talking professional level broadcasting at your house, is three things. You need video quality, audio quality, and lighting quality. And what's amazing is they realize that, and these are big broadcasting companies. They can, to each of their, their people on their show, send out a digital SLR camera, that's the video, some broadcast lighting. I have some Elgatos. I can talk about all that. And then a mic, a USB mic. So with, less than a couple $1,000s, all of a sudden they had professional level broadcasting setups in their house. And so that's what I've done with my teaching setup. So not only have I set up an accessible system for my low vision, but being a photographer and knowing all this about lighting and digital content creation, I think I coined this term, at least I never heard about it before I thought of it, broadcast teaching. And what I see is teaching is a means of content creation. It really is. Even in person, you're creating content verbally with slides, with exams, and the whole purpose is to help someone learn. And so what I envision is this, what we've all learned from this digital age is we can really control the digital content we create and make it engaging. And even when we go back to the classroom, we can take that with us and we can, use these tools we're learning. And there's a lot of things, that can branch off from that.
I love your perspective. I really do. And it's actually a great segue into what I wanted to talk about next. And it's photography, your digital artwork. I'm assuming you've been doing photography prior to having vision loss. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. So I've lost my vision or my central vision 2019, and I've been doing photography for over 12, 13 years now. Well, maybe what I should say, because I should remember that, people are going to be listening to this and I want them to understand. So I have what's called LHON, Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy. And I should preface that I actually haven't been diagnosed with it, and I can talk about that. But so my central vision is what I no longer have. And your central vision is what's responsible for visual acuity. So reading things, small print. My particular disorder, LHON, the amount of peripheral vision you retain is highly variable. And I'm on the spectrum of, I have a lot of peripheral vision, whereas some people are almost totally blind.
Okay.
So with that said, my main the main thing that I experienced when I got back into photography, because I didn't even touch a camera for over a year after I lost my vision, was, and I still can't, is I can't see or read anything on the camera. So because with digital cameras, you don't even have to see the image. As long as it's focusing on what you want to focus on, you can take 100 images and look at them later. So and that didn't change, because you still have the same sense of what you want to capture, but it's not being able to adjust settings quickly. And that's what was really frustrating. Like, my first time picking up my camera was just actually a few months ago, 4 months ago. I went on this backpacking trip with some friends, and there were some moments that were so frustrating because, well, for one, I hadn't picked up my camera for a year, so I forgot some settings to do some essential things. And then my friends were so helpful with me, but there were some times where, yeah, it's just so frustrating. But the thing is if you persevere and just learn different ways of doing it, luckily the just photography is just about capturing light, and so that's going to be the same.
You have on Instagram, you go by the Light Ninja. I checked this morning, your followers, 63.7 thousand followers. Oh my God. How do you do that?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Randy. I mean, so let me just talk about that a little bit. So when I was maybe about 5 years ago, so I had created my Instagram account a long time ago when I was dating this girl, and I just thought of the Light Ninja. don't really remember why exactly, but I just thought it sounded cool. And,
It's a great name.
there was so many, you can hardly find a name on Instagram without putting like, periods in between everything. So anyways, I just randomly thought of that. And then a couple years later, I was on a backpacking trip with some friends. And, this friend of mine who is in the tech industry suggested I start an Instagram because there were so many options and platforms of where to put my art. And so he was like, just start an Instagram. And so I remembered I did that. And I've gone through and deleted so many of my old posts. But if you look back, I haven't deleted this one because it was a post where when I first got 300 followers. And I was like so grateful for that because you know what it
It's
was cool.
huge.
It was a huge accomplishment.
Yeah.
And now, and so then you asked, how did I get to where I'm at now? And, people ask me this all the time. They message me on Instagram, like, how can I grow my followers? And, again, I could spend a whole day talking about Instagram and everything, but bottom line is you have to create content that people want to see. And I think if people who are into social media and Instagram or Facebook, if you want to grow an audience, whether that's for business, for teaching, for whatever, I think your number one focus should be on the content creation. And if that's your number one focus and things branch off from there, you're going to grow. And that's because there's going to be people in the world who want to see that. Now, if your main priority is to grow and not create good content, then it's going to be hard because, you're going to have to spend a lot of money. And so for me, what I did was just literally, I just focused on creating content and engaging with people. Um, and in terms of my art style, that's definitely evolved. So when I, first started photography, I did a lot of bokeh shots. Bokeh is a Japanese word for blurring of the light, pretty much. And
Okay.
that's pretty much my favorite thing about photography is using lenses that allow you to have a shallow depth of field where the subject's in focus, but the rest of the picture is out of focus. And that's where you get that professional cinematic look.
Very similar to the portrait feature that iPhone has on their
Well,
camera.
exactly. So the
Yeah.
iPhone's using software to
Right.
and they do an amazing job, amazing job. So anyways, that's what I used to like a lot. Then when I got into backpacking about 5 years ago, I was like, wow, I have all this professional photography equipment and I'm going to these amazing places, why not bring it? So I started to do a lot of landscape and stuff like that. Well, then, I was like, okay, well, I'm out and under these stars and these, really dark skies, and I can see the Milky Way with my naked eye. Let's take some pictures of it. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing what you can get with your camera. So I started to get into Milky Way or astrophotography. And, here's where I have to say there's a huge community of astrophotographers on Instagram. And one of the biggest influences for me was this guy, Derek Culver. And his Instagram name was Blazing Heavens, it used to be. And there's a story of he changed it. And at the time, I took the name to make it into to an Instagram hub. And he never wanted to change it back. I even, talked to him and said, offered to give him back because I knew someone was going to grab that name. And so I had the Blazing Heavens name, and but he didn't want it anymore. But he was the biggest influence for me in my current artwork. And I'll never, deny that. And this is what happened was I got into astrophotography, and if you take pictures of the Milky Way, you're limited by the shutter speed. And that's how long you can keep the shutter open. And that's because of star trails, right? Because the Earth is moving opposite of the stars. And so you're going to get star trails. Well, if you get a device called a star tracker, it allows you to take basically images with as long as shutter speed as you want because the star tracker moves in the opposite direction of the Earth and it allows you to track the sky. But what happens when you track stars is the foreground is automatically blurred out. And so you have to do a composite image. So you take the sky and you take the foreground, and then later on in Photoshop, you merge them. So what Derek was doing at the time is he was taking these really detailed Milky Way shots, and then rather than just putting them into like a foreground that you took at night while you were doing the Milky Way shot, he would put them into these really pretty dreamscapes, like just any type of landscape image. And he, at the time, he shared with us a video tutorial that he made on YouTube of his process of doing this in Photoshop. And literally from that video, that's where I learned like my foundational techniques. And then, over the past 3 or 4 years, I've developed, my own techniques that I use for my images. But to make a long story short, that's what I like to do most now is I make composite images where I turn day photographs into a night photograph. And I don't try to do realism. My only purpose is I try to create images that I myself find beautiful.
How would you describe? Just pick one piece that you've done, and
Sure.
give us as much detail as as you're willing to and can do, please.
What I try to do is when I'm out photographing landscape images, just when I'm backpacking, I try to take an image where the foreground sort of looks like it's at sunset time. So the cool thing about sunset is, the sun, when it's not directly above us and it's kind of around the horizon, it creates what's called golden hour, this really beautiful glow to it. So what I try to do in my images is I take a foreground, or basically the main subject of the image, and then in Photoshop I add a Milky Way behind it, so a dark night sky, and then in the middle of that, so the middle of the foreground and the Milky Way, I add a sunset, so just the pretty colorful clouds of a sunset. And then in Photoshop, I edit the image to make it look like the sun is actually coming up right above the horizon. And so the picture is very selectively edited. So you have light on the areas where you would expect light to be if the sun was coming from this direction, and you have shadows in the other areas. So you try to really make it look realistic in that sense, that you're still having the light shadows in the proper directions.
Yeah, you've got 3 different lighting sources, and you're trying to make it all look like it's got
Yeah,
one
like,
common
so
source.
I'm not trying to make it look like it was a real photo, but trying to make it look accurate to the eye, because if you don't blend it properly, the eye just automatically says this doesn't look real. And so the whole trick is to try to make it look like you have a Milky Way appearing with a sunrise or a sunset, which in reality is impossible to capture. You can never capture that with a camera. The dynamic range is just too far off. So that's when I look at my final image, that's what I see is this kind of fairy tale image of a sun just slowly creeping up the horizon and that warm glow covering the earth, but you can still see this detailed starry sky.